Greetings and welcome to this all-new Trapcode Tao session. I hope you're doing great today because I'm pretty excited. We're going to create these seamlessly looping perpetual motion kinetic sculptures. And let me first give some credits to Anthony Howe, who is the person who created these nice little moving structures here. Pretty nice looking, and randomly as I was looking at this, I was thinking in my head, well, I absolutely have to make something like that in Trapcode Tao. So pretty nice stuff. I'm gonna post the link to his creations down below, and not that we're gonna create any we're not gonna replicate any of this to the exact detail, but we're gonna use this principle to create something nice of our own in Trapcode Tao, and hopefully as we do this step by step, you can create one of your own that is completely different than what we're going to do here. But let's go ahead and start this off by creating a new solid, the control Y, and I'm going to call this kinetic perpetual and 1080 by 1080. So we're going to have it a square composition, and the control Y, make a new solid. I'm going to call this one Tao, and click OK. I'm gonna double click on my Tao effect here to apply this on my solid, and for the moment I'm gonna turn it off. And what I'm gonna do at first is we're gonna draw a shape simply on this solid. So I'm gonna activate the title action safe guide, and let's grab the pen here and let's draw a basic shape. So I'm gonna make a first point here, and I'm gonna hit shift to make sure that this is straight. I'm gonna make a second one here, and then I'm gonna hold Alt and click here to drag the handle downwards, and I'm gonna click beside to make another one, still holding shift to make sure that this is going straight up and down. And if I want to make sure that we're even, hit Control R to reveal the rulers here that we have in After Effects, and I'm gonna put it right here to make sure that this one is at approximately the same level. Well, not approximately, but exactly. And if I hold shift here, it'll snap onto it. So I can do the same for the handles below. So I'm gonna drag this over here, and I'm gonna bring this up here, and now we have this nice groove here, which we can modify to our likings. And I'm gonna complete that by dragging on another point down here, down below. And now this here, this handle, I wanna pull it towards the right here and upwards, but if I do that, it's gonna influence the other end. So let me undo this. If we hold Alt while we pull on this arrow, we're gonna leave alone the other one, and that's gonna allow us to make this kind of curve here that we want. And this is completely arbitrary, but what I'm trying to do here is to have something to make our to put down some weight for our fictive gravity that we're gonna put up here later in the tutorial. So let's get on with this. So we have our nice shape. Maybe we can bring this a little bit towards here and have it a little bit less. Alright, so we don't need our rulers anymore. We can shut this off, Control R. So now we have our basic shape. We can turn Tao back on, and as soon as we do that, we'll see that we have on top of our automatically generated path our path that we just drawn with our mask. So let's start by shutting off our automatically generated path. So we're left with only what's relative to our mask here, and let's play around with that. So usually I like to put lights to draw geometry, because you know that we have plenty of options here that we have access through the lights, like light commands and everything of that nature. But what's interesting about using the masks is that we have this positioning property here that is independent from the world property, from the world transform properties, and also these rotation here that we're going to take advantage of to have this piece rotate. All right, so let's maybe start by going in our segments section, and let's increase the amount of sides, and let's maybe bring it the size down here, so we have some kind of a tube, and I'm gonna simply shut off the mask so we don't see it by clicking here. And as you can see now, it's kind of it doesn't have enough segments to be that smooth, so once we increase that, we'll have kind of a more smooth result here. And we don't need the title safe, or maybe actually let's set it back on, and let me re-enable the mask, and this is gonna be the center point. It's gonna be our pivot point. So when we rotate this, let me check here on Z, not the segment here, but the path from masks. So if I rotate this, this is going to be the pivot point, is going to be the center. So we want to make sure that our mask is correctly positioned around our pivot point. So let's double click here on our mask, so we have it selected, and then we can move it around to make sure that this goes right in the middle, kind of as if it was our pivot point. And we can also perhaps mess around with that curve here, so we get exactly the amount, the correct groove here. So it was not that nice before, and perhaps it's too high, so let's lower it down here maybe. I'm not sure how this is going to turn out, but let's make sure that we keep our groove right, our pivot point right there, so that when we rotate, it goes around like this. Cool. So let's keyframe that. We can make sure that we are on the frame 0, and hit the stopwatch here to make a keyframe at 0, and let's get on frame 90 or 100. It's going to be easier if we have any maths to do based on that, and let's make it 360. So let's hit U. Now we have our rotation, and if we get to frame 99 and we hit N, and we can preview this, is gonna loop. So that's pretty cool. Now I wish that there was kind of this thing here available for the paths from lights as well. That would, I think that would be a useful addition in the next installment of Trapcode Tao. Next, let's repeat that shape around a radius, around a circle disposition. So let's get in, not in fractal displacement, but right underneath repeat paths, and let's open up our first repeater. So let's increase the amount of repetitions, and as soon as we do that, we'll see this, and we don't need this to be on anymore. So first let's shut off the symmetric doubler, so we only do it on one side, and let's not offset it on the position X at all. We want to rotate on the Y. Alright, so this is what we want to have. But first we don't want the center of this to be right in the middle, if that makes any sense. So we can get back here to our paths for mask, and we'll simply drag this onto the side here. So let's make it 800. And now we still have this piece rotating around its pivot point here, but now when we increase the first repeater, the world rotate Y here is gonna go around. So the basic rule here, if we're having something in a radial shape, it's going to be 360 degrees. So the number of repetition can work like this. So say we want to have 40 pieces of that repeating around. So let's put 40 here, and what's the appropriate value for here is simply 360, which is 360 degrees for a circle, divided by this amount, divided by the amount of pieces. So divided by 40, it's 9. So we'll have a perfect revolving thing. And since we've animated it, well, it's gonna go rotating around our pivot point, exactly like we want. Alright, groovy. So let's make sure that it's correctly arranged. Let's get back in our repeat pass, and let's have that. There's too much for the moment. Let's make this 20. Oops. And let's double this, so times 2. Alright. So let's make sure that they doesn't meet each other. But first let's make this 0, and let's have a tip on both sides with let's have sphere tips that we can put one on top and one at the bottom here, and let's create a new light. So we're gonna hit Control Shift Alt L, and let's call this one Tao Sphere. So Tao Sphere is going to simply add ourselves a nice sphere. So what we might want to do with that sphere is make sure that it's zeroed out on Z, and we can also make sure that its auto orientation is set to off, and then we can simply bring it up here, and let's hit twice on A quickly, and if we increase the radius it won't have any effect on our sphere. But let's get back on Tao and open up the Tao paths from lights and make sure that size from radius is activated, and then let's make it a little bit bigger so we can just roughly center it. We know that we're right at 0, we're okay. And let's make another one. Let's bring it down, and this one will make it right here. Alright, so this now it won't really rotate around, won't it? So what we need to do, if we want this thing to follow this thing, what's rotating here, let's set it up so we have only one place to keyframe. So first let's create a new null, and this null, let's call it pivot. Let's make it 3D, and let's bring this right where our pivot point is. Alright, and let's connect both our Tao sphere lights to that. First step. And what we can do also is on our pivot, we're gonna call it pivot settings, and we can add a few settings on there. So let's get in the expression controls, and let's add an angle control for the rotation. So we're gonna use this. So this goes from 0 to 360. So let's keyframe that on this. So we're gonna have this called rotation, and rotation Z maybe. So let's create a keyframe here at frame 0. Let's go at frame 100, and let's make it 1 here. So let's hit U. Now we have this. We don't need it anymore. We're gonna simply connect it to that, so we don't have two different things to keyframe. So let's shut it off, and let's alt click on the stopwatch now and bring the pick whip here on our angle. So now the rotation Z is gonna be picked up from the angle here on our custom slider. Alright, and this thing also, let's hit Shift Z so we reveal its rotation, and we can alt click here and also have that connected to the angle there. So that will move our spheres along with our shape. Pretty cool. So next, let's have those repeated again. So I'm gonna put 20, but no. Oh no, our spheres, they're only repeated once now. So one thing that we can do here is add some bit of light commands here, and I don't think that you need a space here necessarily, but let's type down SID, not SID, but let's type down rep 1, and that will force it to be included in the repeater. So see down there, it's got the repetition, so we can grab it from here and also make sure that this slide has it, and now our sphere is also repeated. So that's how you make sure that objects that are generated with special lights are also included in the repetition, if you ever need to do that for some reason. So there we have it. One thing that we can also do here, as I notice, is that we can have our position keyframe here. So let's put this to 800, so it's exactly right where our pivot point is, and on top of this setting here that we've created, that is custom, we can add a slider control, and let's call this radius. So this is going to be the one and only place that we're gonna keyframe, or we're gonna control the spreading out of our repeated shapes. So let's do that. Let's make sure that this sticks here by locking it down here, and let's open up the settings in our let's twirl down our Tao effect here, and get in the paths from mask here. We have the position property here. We can type down 800, or so we have the radius independent from anything else. We don't need to control the Y and Z, only the X. So let's all click on the position here, and let's type down open bracket, and right away grab the pick whip here and point right at our radius here, then hit comma and simply point here with the pick whip, and then not right away, but right after typing down another comma, we're going to point to Z, and then all they have to do is close the bracket. So we now have an expression here that's been entered here automatically for us, but that makes it so this controls our radius here, but our spheres doesn't come with it yet. Let's do that. See, it's the same 800 here. We can put this down at 140 to make sure that it's right exactly where our pivot point is. And this here, we can also alt-click the position from our null. That is our pivot on which our Tao spheres are attached to. And simply, once again, open bracket, pick whip to the radius, comma, pick whip here. Oops, didn't do it correctly. Pick whip here, comma, and pick whip here, close bracket. There. So we have now independently from anything, right on our setting here, we have one slider that controls our radius here, and we have another slider here that controls the angle here that we've keyframed. So now our spheres are always attached to our objects here, and we're getting out of frame. So let's create a new camera. So Control Shift Alt C, and let's make it 35 millimeter. Gonna have a little bit of perspective in there, and let's create a new null. So Control Shift Alt Y. I'm gonna call this one Dolly, and that's a habit. Just gonna make it pink, and I'm gonna connect the camera to it. So this is our center point, and of course it has to be 3D. So now if I rotate here on Y, I'm rotating right from the center of our whole repeated shape. So I'm gonna grab the camera, I'm gonna hit C, just so I get this icon here, and I'm gonna pull back to make sure that everything is captured in our framing here, so nothing gets out. So that's in itself a pretty cool way to set up something. It has many possibilities. From there you can use your own imagination and create something that is pretty nice based on math. So that's pretty cool. So now it's looping and they're still touching, so we can simply make the radius a little bit bigger. There we go. So that's fine. It's gonna loop. It's gonna loop on the 100 frames. So now the motion is linear, so it doesn't look like there's any gravity in there. If we want to add some gravity now, so this is when it comes handy now, because we don't have anything else to keyframe here. If I have nothing selected, I hit U. The only keyframes that we have now is these, and everything else is connected through expressions. So I'm gonna work on these and make sure that we have some gravity or some impression of gravity. So let's get right in between at frame 50 here, and let's create another keyframe before we do anything else. So right when they are completely on top, so right at this point they should be at their most slow point, if that makes any sense. And then we're gonna come here, and I'm not gonna hit Shift F9 because it's gonna stop the recording there, but I'm gonna right click and get to the keyframe assistant, and I'm gonna easy ease out. No, that's not the right one. Undo. I'm gonna ease in on the last one, and I'm gonna right click keyframe assistant, ease out on the first one, right? And this one in the middle here, let's hit Control and click it, so it's gonna make it circle. it's the same as if we would no, I don't think we can have this done from the menu at any point. Right, so just control click the keyframe to make sure that it's it becomes a circle, and then we can come in the graph setting here. So this is going to be the curve that we get here, and it's gonna go from 0 degree, like the speed 0. So we don't want necessarily to be at 0 here, so let's bring this around 100 maybe, and let's make sure that it's the same on the other side, and maybe that's a little bit too much, so right in between the 100 and the 50 here. And then let's stretch this out, and let's bring this down, this one down, so we have some kind of a Batman ears thing going on, because it's gonna slow down at the middle, and I'm not sure if that makes any sense, so let's test it out. And let's try to put those higher at 200 now, and let's see what we get out of that. So let's pull those in, and let's see. Really fast around this point, like this is where it has to go fast, and this is where it almost stops, right at this point here. And if we pull those to the side, it'll stop for a longer amount of time. It'll go zip. So sometimes it won't work when we, like I did some RAM previews now, and I wasn't under the impression that I was getting it right, because sometimes we need to refresh the cache. So I just did it now, and now it's completely exaggerated. So we had the principle right here, but now I completely overdone it. So now it completely stops right here because it's at 0. So let's take this same principle, but let's tone it down now. So let's bring this like that. This can like be right around here. And are we on frame 50? Or we're still on frame 50. So these can be brought down maybe to this point here, and this one. Let's get down here. So we want to basically look at this one here, and it's got to be shaped like an S like that. So let's force refresh, Control Alt front slash, and let's preview it out again. So this time, what do we have? Oh, it's still not going too fast. So we were almost right. We were almost right. Let's bring those right up there. And I think that if we pull those in a little bit, like this is the one we're looking at really for the. This is the speed. So this is the speed line, and this is the value. So we can also mess around with that, but might be a little confusing. So this, let's force refresh, and let's preview that out. So maybe this way around it's easier to understand. So this actually will represent the value curve, while this represent the speed curve. And if you have this both at the same time, so if you can get an idea. So that's the kind of what kind of movement we're left with after messing around with our curves. It's a little bit less linear, so fiddle with that until you get exactly what you want, and hopefully that simulates some gravity or some more interesting motion with easing, rather than just have it linearly going around. So pretty cool. So now that we have that, one thing that we can also do, let's select our Tao solid, and now we've locked down our general settings here, but we can hit F3, and then we have our Tao here, and let's bring it down here, so that way we can look at both at the same time. So let's get down here, and in our first repeater, let's also increase the position Y as we do that, so it kind of goes down at the same time. And let's set this back to 40, and that means we have to set this back to 9. So we have, and maybe reduce this amount, so we have something that's decreasing as it gets repeated, and that's it's going to give us this kind of motion. And of course our gravity is still being it's still in use here. So now let me show you one other thing. If you can look at our spheres here that we got, they have this by default amount of sides in them, and this will not be influenced by the value that we put down here. So let's see if we put down 55 instead. If I don't know that you've noticed because of the compression, but this will change, make it smoother on our pieces here, but it won't affect the amount of sides on our sphere. If we want to make our spheres smoother here, we have to do it manually here by typing down SID 55 and 055, because this has to be 3 digits, and I know it's going to be a bit confusing here, but we don't need any space. But since the amount of characters that we can have in the light name that will be recognized is 32, we want to avoid this name to be that long as much as we can. So now I've put down SID 55 here, and I'm going to do the same here on my other light. And as I force refresh it, Control-Alt-/, I don't know that you're going to be able to notice it because of the YouTube's compression, but we've got smoother spheres here. But that being said, we might want to keep this number down as we work on it to get faster previews. So let's put this down even to 8. So we're going to intentionally make it less detailed, but just for the sake of animating it and messing around with other aspects, and have it preview a little bit faster. So let's make the side 8 here, and we don't need the chamfer to be active there. And the segments, let's make it 100. So let's bring this down, as long as it doesn't completely screw up our path here. So this this is correct for the moment. So we can work with that, and it's gonna go super fast, especially if we got this down to quarter res. Now if I preview this, it's gonna take a little it's gonna be much faster to preview. Let's bring our camera up now a bit, now that we've made it so it's it goes down in the repetition, or maybe we can simply do that through the world transform. Not the world rotate, but the world position. But first of all, let's make this metallic. Let's color it and make it kind of a metal aspect, reflecting our environment. Let's see how we could do that quite easily with HDRI images. So I've got this HDRI dry field image which I bought. I'm gonna put down the links for that in the description below. So I'm gonna import that file. So depending on what quality, what output quality you're after, and since this is only a tutorial, I'm gonna use a smaller one, but I have a 16K HDR image for this dry field. I don't need it. I don't think I need this this amount of detail in it, but know that this possibility is always available. If it will work the same, it will only take much more time to render if you use the higher resolution. But let's use the 4K, and let's bring this down here, and let's see. Let's shut it off, and let's hit Control Shift C to make this into a composition, and let's leave all our attributes, and we're going to call this dry field 4K reflection. And this reflection, let's create a new comp out of it, and know that since these are high range images, we can have more details and more color details if we have that to 32 bits per channel. Let me not drift off too far, but let me just show you the difference. If I was to mess around with the curves here on this, so let's bring out the curves here, and if I'm at 8 bits per channel here, this spot here that is very bright, I want to for instance tone it down here. It's only gonna be grayed, like we're not gonna have any detail in those areas here. I don't know if that's the perfect image to show this example, but if I have this at 32 bits per channel, it's going to we're gonna keep our nice rays here around our sun. So we're working with more information here if we have this at 32 bits per channel, and it will affect the reflection in our Tao as well, since we're using that as a reflection. So let me take a picture, Shift F8, and let's compare. No, we can't do that. Why wouldn't it let us? Anyway, so that's the difference here with this curve at 32 bits per channel and at 8. This is no details, and this is much more details. So that's when you decide that perhaps you want to work we want 16 or 8-bit is completely okay for you, or if you need a greater amount of control with the amount of light that is blowing off your objects in your scene, then you'll simply have to work with 32 bits per channel. So enough with that explained. We have our second composition here, and we're gonna rename that diffuse, because this is going to be our diffuse map. And this, it doesn't need to be that big, since it's a diffusion. And let's get rid of this so we don't get any confusion. So let's make this composition the diffuse. Let's get in our composition settings, and let's lock down the the aspect ratio, and we only need this to be for example 400 by 200, and let's hit Control Alt F. That's gonna rescale our image to the size of our composition, and let's go ahead and apply a fast blur on here, and make sure that we repeat the edge pixel, and let's increase this value here so it's diffused. Here is we're gonna pick up the light data from that. So let's get back in our main comp here, and now we already have our reflection here. Let's bring our diffuse composition as well. So right there it is. And since we're having this in this, any changes that we make here, so maybe there's where we would have the curve if we really wanted to tone down this bright sun here, so that will translate to our diffusion and image as well. So we don't need it to be visible here, so we can shut it off, and that's where we're gonna go in Tao. And so this example here, we're gonna light this object not by using After Effects lights object, and no ambient light at all, no specular from this is going to be pick up from there. We're gonna go down in the image-based lighting, and for the reflection environment map, we're gonna choose our 4K reflection, and by default it's gonna look like that. And let's see our diffusion. We're gonna use that. So let's set that to 0. So that's only with our diffusion. So this is an object that would not necessarily have any reflection on it, but simply have the diffusion of the light of our environment here reflected on it. And as we increase this, it will allow us to add the actual reflection of that environment in our object. Let's make it more obvious by actually having our background based on our equirectangular image here. And one simple way to do that with Trapcode tools, there's a good chance that you also have this plugin if you bought the Trapcode suite, is Horizon, which is something that we can create a new solid to use it on, and let's call this Horizon. So it's going to be our background. We're going to bring it underneath the Tao solid, and where's our setting? We need to apply Horizon. So here I have it, Trapcode Horizon. Let's double click. By default, it's going to make a background with a gradient, but that's interesting. Let me shut that off because this is something that we can rotate in 360 degrees with our camera in. So that's the idea. Instead of having the gradient, we want to apply our image here that's already there. So we don't need to do anything else than select it from this drop down menu here. So it's our reflection that we're using. So there we go. Automatically, as I do that, you can see that that's the bright spot here, the sun in our image. It's our light directions are correct, and the object looks like it's there in this scene. So let's I don't know that it's a good idea to have the light point directly, like if the sun is in the image, it makes an area that's very bright. So let's rotate that around, and if we look at it from the back, so right, the sun is there. So let's see, if we were to put the sun here, right in the center at 24, that means that we're looking right at it. If we wanted to be reflected from our back, it would mean that we will have to rotate 180 degrees from this position. So let's add 180 to that. So that's the angle where we have the sun right behind us, if that's the angle that you want to have looking at your object. And now is the time that you can simply rotate, either bring it upwards with the camera. So right, perhaps if we look at it from this angle, right, the sun is coming from there, so that's pretty nice. Say that's the angle that I want. And now we can use this in the world transform to raise it up a little, if that's what we're after. And Control Shift H to hide the layer control. So there we have our nice sculpture. Let's make a ring to have this hold on to, not to float in space. So oh yeah, you can also increase the Fresnel, and that's based how much reflection that you get on your object based on the angle it has from looking at how the camera is looking at it. So also this will allow you to darken your object. But this here, note that this will not change anything, since we're not we could have an ambient light and light objects on top of that system to help us get even more specularity out of our thing, and this is not something that's wrong to do, but in this case we're going to keep it simple and not use any of those light objects to light it. So let's let's have 80 of them, and let's, instead of 9, let's have 4.5, so 9 divided by 2, and that's the kind of shade that we have. Pretty cool. And let's make it straight, so let's bring this back up to 80, and let's bring also this back to 540, and we're gonna make some kind of a ring. And since we work with our little groove here being at the center, it's not gonna be too hard for us. So let's create yet another light, not a null, but we save this, and let's create a light. Control Shift Alt L, and we're gonna call this one Tao, and it's gonna be a spotlight. And we know at first that, but let me show you what's gonna happen. So this light here, I'm gonna hit Control Shift H to reveal light controls, and perhaps we can already get in the transform auto orient by right clicking and setting it to off. And I'm gonna create a new null, so Control Shift Alt Y. I'm gonna call this one ring. I'm gonna make it 3D. I'm gonna pick up the position here and paste it right there on our Tao light. And I'm gonna also bring this. We can also connect it to our pivot setting, the radius thing. Is that something that we should do? Yes, let's try that. So this light is going to be, now that it's sharing the same position properties as our null object here, we're going to connect it to it. It's going to become 0, 0, and 0, and now is when we're going to do the same we did earlier. I'll click on this, open bracket, first value is going to be the radius, and then comma, we could put 0, and then we can put comma this, doesn't matter, close the bracket, click to enable this, so this will follow our radius. And our ring here, I'm going to hit R to reveal the rotation properties, and this is the only thing we're going to keyframe to generate a path here. So let's click on stopwatch here on Z, and let's get to frame 300 because it's the default amount of frames used when you don't have keyframes. Anyway, it's what we can create another one here and have it rotate one full rotation. So let me refresh that, and what do we get? What do we get? So we have something that's quite not what we want. Absolutely not. So first thing is that it's repeated, and we want this ring to be just one thing, and that's not repeated actually. So how can we do that? Well, there is this slide command that we can add here that will simply remove this light, anything that's generated by this light with Tao to be repeated. So let's do that. We're gonna type down rep, and we're gonna set this to 0. So that's gonna tell it not to be repeated. So let's refresh. What do we have? Some nice ring that's not facing the right direction. Can we rotate it 90 degrees that way? Yes, but it will affect how it looks here. So can we also rotate this 90 degrees? Yes, and I think that we should get what we want from that. Let's rotate it a little bit. So yeah, we got our ring here, and well, it's probably not the right size, so we probably need this pivot radius setting to be divided by 2. So let's try that. Let's add divide by 2 here. So that makes our ring right around our pivot point here. I think should be okay. Let me undo the cam movements here, and let me reduce the amount of repetitions so we can verify that. F3. So let's bring this up there. I want these settings to be here. Right. Where is the repeater? Let's make this 20, and let's set that to full, and let's hide. And oh, our ring is still not facing the right direction. Can we fix that? Doesn't seem to be how we want it angled. That's something that we can perhaps fix by changing this. So there's something that I don't understand here. Is that why is it facing the right direction when it's right there? Alright, since we can't really get what we want, because either we have it flat over here, and what we really wish we could do was in fact we want to have it like that. We want to be able, ultimately what would be ideal is to have this light some way of hard coding it to be not oriented to the path, so it behaves exactly like it would behave in if this was checked off. But we have to keep it checked. We have to keep this setting activated because this geometry created by the mask, we want to keep it the same. So that also doesn't fix the problem because it's flat, but either on the other side, and this also gets screwed up. So let's keep this on the C, and let's see an entirely different way that we can do that. So what if we didn't have the ring? What if we create the circle directly with only the position and no rotation at all? So here is something that I'm gonna put down in the description below, but here is a little patch of code here that we can paste on our light here, and let's get rid of that. Let's disconnect that from there, and let's get rid of that, and let's get rid of all our script here. So we have our light, it's right at the middle, and let's alt click on the position and let's paste the code here, and so that's what we'll have. Now it's not completely perfect, as you can see here. We're getting a little bit of distortion on the ring here, but that shouldn't be that much of a problem when we have, and this here, I'm not sure of the math of how to get that, but this is like in this whole formula here, and I think I have it wrong way around. Let's do that. So this is how I got it by default in this this formula, and we still have the problem here, and I'm not that good of a mathematician, so I don't know exactly what sinus and cosinus do here, but one is related to the x and the other one to the z if we just invert them. So we can either invert this, instead of sin we're going to type down cos here, and instead of cos here we're going to type down sin here, and that's going to make it almost the right angle. So now this here, the s is some weird value here, because is the speed. If I have it, we have to find our perfect number here, because our loop point is here at frame 300. If we want to use this 10 seconds as a base, default base for the duration used on the timeline to create our geometry, then it's gonna rotate once and then twice, and then it's gonna rotate many times and lay down more and more geometry as it goes around this path here. But it's simply a way of finding the right number here. So for our case, it's going to be this number here. Alright, there's probably a math here that we can bring to this, but I simply just went on manually and basically simply went on like 0.8, and we still had a problem, still having a problem here, and like 1.5, and it's making a lot of rotation. So I just went on and see where the limit was. So if I type down 0.6, 0.2, so this is not one full rotation yet. So where does it get exactly at the same point? So what we have here is the same as what we have here. Well, it's just a matter of going like this, and now I'm it's there, and this is going a little bit past it, so 6, and it's not enough. So now is where you go 6.5. It's a little too much, so 6, 4, 5, and expanding on this, I was able to find out that this is quite the value that makes it exactly the same. So I'm at frame 300 here, and this is the position, and I'm at frame 1 here, and this is the position. So I don't know, the only difference is the minus sign here, but we're getting exactly what we want. So I'll put this code down here, and there's probably a different way of doing it. Now, why is that copied several times here? I don't know. So there we have it, and now it's not exactly aligned with our groove here, so we can fix that by adding here so this here by default it had a value, you know, for the this is the radius, the diameter. It gets divided by 2 afterwards. So this comes from I've just if we had 100 here, it would be a diameter of 100, 800, and what we want to do here is bring this value from our radius, and since it's not exactly the same, we can add one more here, and we're going to call this one gap, and let's bring it down to 0 for the moment, and right here we can add plus this, and then we can increase this value here to come and adjust our ring so it comes right at the right place here for our groove. So now actually when we get back to the correct amount of repetition, let me get back in the repeater here, and 40, no, 80. So we have everything aligned with our ring here, and we can always bring it upwards, downwards, depending on where we want it. So let's get back in Tao, and let's maybe make this a little bit smaller. Let's flatten our sphere on top of this here. So this is our sphere. Let's go ahead and mess around with the radius here so we see which one we're touching. This is the one at the bottom, so let's put it underneath here, and this one here is the one on top. So if we would want to make this flat here, well, it's kind of centralized by default. If we want to influence this, it's gonna change it's gonna change only this. It's not gonna affect the shapes we generate with either our mask or our special lights. So one thing that we can do, since we have the size from radius activated, in fact the only way I know to do this is to let's get here. This is our position data for our top sphere. Let's create a new null, and we're going to call it flat sphere, make it 3D, and on this occasion here we want to unhook the temporarily the light from the pivot setting here, so we get the real position here. So let's reveal the position from our null here, and let's copy those, make sure it is exactly the same. So what we have now is this null here exactly where this is, and then we're gonna connect our light to our flat sphere null here, and our flat sphere is going to be connected to our pivot setting. So that means we can then go in the scale of this null, which is now the parent of this. So let's color code them here, and if we uncheck the proportional scaling properties, if we mess around with those, as you can see, we can actually make it flat, and we can also change its size properties independently. It doesn't quite make sense because I'm increasing the value now to make it thinner, but it'll work nonetheless. And also we can, for example, if I rotate this, we can have them angled in a different manner. So now I'm gonna come back here and hit double A, and we can increase its radius to have something like that. So that's pretty cool. It's another way that we can make this look like it's not exactly a sphere, perhaps something that picks up the wind or anything of that nature. Let's have a post here. So let's have a spotlight. I'm going to call it Tao. And let's hit enter. Sorry there. And by default, let's make a new null. We're going to call this post. And let's make this 3D. Let's grab its position, paste it on our new light. And let's connect this to that. So it's at 0, 0, 0. Let's make a first keyframe on frame 0. Let's go at frame 300. And let's make another keyframe here. Get back on 1. And now I can scrub this on the Y downwards. So 180 here. And I can copy and paste that, but make it minus here so it goes upwards. Let's get back to frame 1, and I'm going to hit refresh. So what we have now is something that goes from the top to the bottom, which of course this ring could be attached to, but it's going to be floating around it for the time being. Since this tutorial has been lasting for way too long, we can make it a little bit larger if we do that. And it also picks up our reflection. And perhaps this is a little bit too high. We can make it less tall by dragging this value closer to 0 here. And let's actually make it... Oh, let's actually make sure that we're messing around with this one. So I was on a bit further than the actual, and why am I not there? So around 624 is around this point here, and if let's get in the radius, and if I want to have something on top, let's just right before it ends, let's make this an held keyframe, go to the next frame, and then increase this pretty much. So let's refresh, and we're gonna have something there. On top of it, and the further we bring this towards frame 300, the further up it's going to be. So then we can have it decrease once again down to 300. And make sure that there's no in-betweens. Something like that, a little bit taller. As we add some segments now, we'll get kind of more of what we want. And of course we can make sure that this light, as always, is set to off in terms of auto orienting, and I think that will get more of what we want, of what we initially wanted here. And once again, I'm going to bring up the amount of sides so it doesn't make it so low poly. So this might be at 90, something that looks better, but it's going to take a bit more of a while to render. So that's quite a lot actually. Let's bring this down now that think that 12 might be enough, just for the sake of previewing it. And then let's run preview that. So we get something that that's all symmetric now in terms of height. And these shapes will always look really nice once they're animated. And of course, like we had earlier, we can bring down the position or up, depending on what we're after here. So 10, and that's our post. Also, we want it to be left out of the repetition, maybe. So if we do that, we'll make sure that it stays only on one instance. And now our ring thing would actually need to be angled. So we would, in fact, would we be able to do that now? Ring. Now we're gonna set it back up on a null that is at the center, and let's attach that to that. And now, are we able to do that? No, it doesn't. Oh yeah. So we're gonna have to find what's the angle. Then we can bring it down like that, and that we're going to be able to manually set it up. Now I'm not gonna do it, but find what's the angle that will allow us to have it. Actually, what we would need to do is to keyframe the position from that. I think it would it work? So no rotation on there. Let's keep it at 0, and let's bring it up like that, right around this point here. And if I make a keyframe here and go to 300, and let's go down. So what will this actually do is bring it down, and it's just the sake of finding those right numbers now to get exactly what's needed. So can I actually time reverse that? Would that be of help? Oh yeah, I think we're getting close to the result we're after now. So I think that would kind of be one of the many ways, but I think the best in this case to have this follow the path. And of course you can find the right math and connect it to through expressions to have it more easily adjustable with the centralized controls here. So I'm gonna stop right here because I've been rambling around for more than an hour on this, I think. One last thing that you might want to check up if you want to repeat this whole path now, because remember we have 2 levels of repeater here, and let me just quickly show you something. Suppose I want to repeat this, make an array of this like in terms of distribution random. We already have one used, so we can't make really a grid So let's see how we would do that. Let's first start by repeating it, and perhaps we would also want, while we do that, to temporarily reduce the amount of sides here, not on the Y but on the X, and let's move that around, and oh, that's nice, it will move it on the X, but not exactly as we want it. It won't repeat our shape in the correct manner. I want to, this is something that can be of course exploited, and it's another way that would allow us to achieve super nice results. But once again, I just want to straightforwardly repeat this shape around. So one easy way that I found that this can work is simply inverting those repeaters. So let's do that. Let's set this back to 0, and we're gonna bring this value here down here, and as we do that, we're gonna hit caps lock to prevent it from refreshing. So I'm gonna put 80 repetitions here, so I'm gonna put 0, and I'm gonna put 80 here, world position X, Y, then Y there, I'm gonna put 10 here, world rotate Y, world rotate Y 4.5, and that's the only thing we change here. But if we did change other stuff, we would translate them onto here, and now we can hit caps lock once again, and we get the exact same thing back. So but now we don't have it from the first but from the second repeater, and that means that we can now, let's test it first with one repetition. If we offset it on X, it will simply move this whole structure. But then we have the other problem, which makes insert that since we don't want to repeat our ring that many times, and we've set it off, well, they won't repeat here. But there's when you can trick everything. It would be fun if this was something that would be possible, if we were to put 2 here, and that would make it so it's only repeated in the second repeater. And is that what's happening here? I'm not sure. I think that our ring here is getting repeated more than its share, but if we had this at 0, it would be the same, I think. So it's just it would be at 1, I mean, so making it active on all, yeah. So it's repeated in the first and in the second. I would like it to be possible to be for an object to be repeated only by the second repeater, so then we would get exactly what we wanted. But anyway, let's see how we can spread them around. So now we have 1 repetition here. If we add more, they will simply go in the back here. So let's decrease this so they get closer here, and let's rotate them on the X, not on the X but on the Z. So not on the Z but on the Y, so they get like curved around a little bit. So we're going to go spiraling, and then we can also offset them on Z a little bit to bring them back there. And also we can increase the random position. It's also going to help, but it's going to make them maybe not good idea. Maybe not a good idea. So random here is not a good idea as well. So no random position. Let's simply find the right perhaps having them repeated here, and then we can get back with the camera, move around depending on what exactly you want to make here. And of course always a possibility to look at them from another angle here. So that's how I do it. Alright, so I'm gonna stop it right here. Of course, this is not the only possible shape. There is an array of infinite possibilities you can explore and mess around with. So thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.